Since the middle of the 19th century, numerous intellectuals and writers have raised doubts about modernity and the possibility of progress. These thinkers understood modernity to mean the intellectual and social projects emerging out of the Age of Enlightenment. Among these diverse projects, we should count abstractions and concepts such as the idea of the public sphere, the nation-state, empiricism, reason, and individual rights. By the end of the century, when the process of modernization kicked into high gear, many Americans found themselves dissatisfied with modernity and the modern project. Mark Twain was one of these turn-of-the-century Americans. One aspect that gave him particular frustration was the culture of planned obsolescence. Now, obsolescence can only really become an issue when the speed of progress requires a diminishing of the present in addition to the past. Temporality, under modernity, is organized into the past, present, and a horizon of expectation known as the future. The future increasingly encroaches on the present by directing our thinking and desires forward. Twain well understood the risks and anxiety of this minimized present through the market logic of investment. Planned obsolescence exploits such anxieties through the introduction of looming future dates of expiration. While emptied or dead forms of culture were of no interest to Twain, those still working elements of the past had some attraction. The ability to use these elements, to repeat certain experiences, to laugh twice at the same joke. These are what he understands to be threatened by obsolescence. In response, Twain produces spaces of temporal possibility within his work, through the telling of short, impartial, yet by necessity linked narratives. I will call these anecdotes. Twain eventually comes to the surprising realization that he can mine his own past as part of an effort to resist the aforementioned logic of planned obsolescence. Autobiography always involves questions about the value of the past, and Twain figured out a formal strategy to preserve his investments. Anecdotes, in Twain, work according to the logic of what the critic Lloyd Pratt would call an archive of time. These refractive archives reveal the temporal complexity of their moment of composition and wrap up and deliver new configurations of time for readers. Autobiography, as a literary genre, functions for Twain as a storehouse of autobiographical anecdotes, not just the massive collection of nonlinear fragments titled The Autobiography of Mark Twain, but all of his autobiographical writing, and perhaps some of his fictional texts too, work like his patented Mark Twain self-pasting scrapbook. Twain's scrapbook was an enterprising invention that combined the material of the scrapbook, bound with blank pages, with pre-applied adhesive. In a fascinating recent book, Ellen Garvey shows the complications of authorship linked to Twain's book. Did he write or invent this scrapbook? Who can be said to be the author of a scrapbook? When, in one of the many fragments found in the autobiography, Twain jokingly claims that he, quote, writes autobiographies for a living, we might want to, despite the very real possibility that we were being played, take him at his word. For almost all of his work might very well be construed as autobiography. Twain's project to find a better form with which to write his autobiography was a lifelong interest. In his final years, it became all-consuming. For any reader who dares to crack open an edition of the autobiography will no doubt quickly notice that his meta-discursive meditations, his struggle with the writing of the autobiography, seems so much more interesting to him than the project of writing about his own past. Short, almost celebratory notes on this topic appear several times, and Twain revels in the multiple discoveries of what he proposes to be a more perfect form to narrate his life. The first textual fragment to appear in the most recent edition, the heavily annotated 3 volumes of the University of California Press's printing of the autobiography, is typical of these methodological revelations. Under the strangely mistitled heading, An Early Attempt, for this was in fact a rather late attempt in his almost 40-year project and composed in 1906, Twain launches into yet another complaint regarding the norms of this highly structured and old, and flexible and difficult narrative form that, quote, starts you at the cradle and drives you straight for the grave with no side excursions permitted on the way. Whereas, he continues, The side excursions are the life of our life voyage and should be also of its history. We find in this passage his major critique of linear and progressive history. Twain understands that any theory that forces history into a narrative progression that leads to an already known outcome, known in advance, will leave much of the life abandoned, as it were, on shore. But there is, to be sure, tension in Twain's conception of life narrative. While he wants to focus on experience that has often been rendered silent, is not contributing to the official story, he knows that one cannot deny the eventual movement toward the conclusion and thus death. That exact tension may even be said to be his signature style. If we consider Twain primarily a humorist and understand the logic of the joke as always involved in a form of belated recognition, we can link his need to insert a slowdown, a temporal delay, as linked to the temporality of the joke. That final moment of recognition as the great cosmic joke unfolds, however, must always, as Twain surely knows, elude us. Thus he attempts to hold off this inevitable future and punchline for as long as he can. His theory of composition for the autobiography lays out some of his understanding of a complex temporality that takes part in a similar logic to the joke. He plans to repeatedly stage temporal eruptions with no thought toward a progressive synthesis. Quote, I intend that this autobiography shall become a model for all future biographies because of its form and method, a form and method whereby the past and present are constantly brought face to face, resulting in contrasts which newly fire up interest all along like contact of flint with steel. These interruptions continue through his final closing words of his autobiography when, at the moment of his daughter Jean's death, he describes an altered relation to the past, one we could describe as restorative or monumental. Has anyone ever tried to put upon paper all the little happenings connected with a dear one? Happenings of the 24 hours preceding the sudden and unexpected death of that dear one? Would a book contain them? Would 2 books contain them? I think not. They pour into the mind in a flood. They are the little things that have always been happening every day, and were always so unimportant and easily forgettable before, but now how different, how precious they are, how dear, how unforgettable, how pathetic, how sacred, how clothed with dignity. A sense of loss and melancholy haunts Twain's late work. Never able to merely allow the past to be past, he uses his art as a way to preserve his complex sense of time.